It was a cold, gray afternoon in Los Angeles. The sharp wind cut through the streets of Skid Row, a place where hope seemed long forgotten. Amid the bustling chaos, Baron Tremont sat quietly in the back seat of his luxury car, lost in thought. The world outside his window was a stark contrast to his life of comfort. But something, or rather someone, caught his eye, jolting him from his reverie. There, on the sidewalk cluttered with makeshift tents and shadows of suffering, sat a woman. She was hunched over, wrapped in a tattered blanket that barely shielded her from the biting cold. Something about her tugged at Barron's memory, a feeling so unsettling it tightened his chest. He couldn't look away, even as he tried to shake off the unease. Life can change in an instant, he thought. Today, we live in comfort, but tomorrow? A twist of fate could take anyone from the top to the depths of despair. This woman was proof of that. The car slowed at a red light. Barron leaned forward, studying her worn face, her trembling hands clutching the thin blanket. And then it hit him. A memory, clear as day, pierced his mind. He knew her. It was Mrs. Hadley, his childhood teacher. The woman who had once inspired him to believe in himself when no one else did. She had taught him more than letters and numbers. She'd taught him about integrity, compassion, and resilience. And now, here she was, a shadow of her former self, lost in the unforgiving streets of Los Angeles. Barron's heart pounded as he tried to process what he was seeing. How could this happen? How could someone so noble, someone who had shaped the lives of so many, end up here? The crushing weight of the realization made it hard to breathe. When the light turned green, Barron made a decision. He opened the car door and stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against the grimy pavement. The world around him seemed to blur as he approached her, his heart in his throat. "Mrs. Hadley," he said softly, his voice trembling. The woman slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, hollow and weary, met his. For a brief moment, recognition flickered in her gaze, only to be replaced by shame. She tried to hide her hands, to smooth down her disheveled hair, as if she could erase the years of hardship etched into her skin. But there was no hiding it. "Barron?" she whispered, her voice weak, a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. Tears welled in her eyes, and Barron's heart shattered. She was more than a teacher to him. She was a symbol of hope, a beacon of strength, and now she was broken. But he refused to look away. He refused to let her disappear. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. Mrs. Hadley hesitated, fear and doubt clouding her expression. She had been let down too many times to trust easily. But Barron extended his hand, unwavering. After a moment of silence, she took it. As the car pulled away from Skid Row, Mrs. Hadley's story began to unfold. She spoke in fragments, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Barron listened, every word slicing through him like a blade. She had once lived a modest but fulfilling life, teaching in Pasadena. Her days were filled with lesson plans, laughter, and a sense of purpose. But life, merciless and unrelenting, had other plans. First, an illness forced her to leave the classroom. Then the sudden death of her husband left her reeling. And just when she thought things couldn't get worse, her adult children, her last lifeline, turned their backs on her. Promises to help faded into silence. Despair consumed her as medical bills drained her savings. She sold her home, clinging to the hope that she could start anew, but the world had other ideas. Homeless shelters became her only refuge, each one more hostile and dehumanizing than the last. A fire at the shelter destroyed what little she had left: her documents, her memories, her dignity. She ended up on Skid Row, where the only constants were hunger, fear, and loneliness. By the time she finished, the car was silent except for the hum of the engine. Barron gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. He would not let her story end here. They arrived at a 5-star hotel. Mrs. Hadley hesitated, her tattered clothes and bare feet a stark contrast to the gleaming lobby. But Barron's unwavering resolve left no room for argument. "Please," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. For the first time in years, she felt warmth, not just from the hotel's luxurious surroundings, but from the kindness in his eyes. Inside the room, Barron booked her a suite and arranged for fresh clothes, a hot meal, and a doctor's visit. Mrs. Hadley clutched the edge of the bathroom sink, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable, but for the first time in years, she felt human again. Barron didn't stop there. Over the following days, he made calls, pulling every string he could. He found her a safe place to live, arranged financial assistance, and secured a role for her at a community center, teaching underprivileged children. When she stood in front of a classroom again, chalk in hand, a piece of her soul came back to life. But the journey didn't end there. Barron knew that helping Mrs. Hadley meant more than offering her temporary solutions. One evening, he invited her to dinner at a quiet restaurant, where they spoke not of her past hardships, but of her dreams. Mrs. Hadley spoke of wanting to establish a program to help homeless individuals rediscover their dignity through education and opportunity. Inspired by her vision, Barron offered to fund the initiative. Together, they started laying the groundwork for the Phoenix Project, a program aimed at providing shelter, education, and career training for the homeless. The project grew rapidly, and Mrs. Hadley became its heart and soul. Months later, she stood on a stage at the opening ceremony of a new shelter funded by the Phoenix Project. Her voice, once frail, now carried strength as she addressed a crowd of supporters, volunteers, and those seeking a second chance. Barron watched from the front row, his chest swelling with pride. "We all deserve a chance to rise from the ashes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "No one should be invisible. Together we can build a world where hope is never lost." The applause was thunderous. Barron knew this wasn't just her triumph, it was theirs. She had given him something, too, a reminder of the power of compassion and the importance of giving back. Their work didn't stop there. Over the following months, the Phoenix Project expanded, opening new shelters and programs across the state. Mrs. Hadley became a beacon of hope for many, her story inspiring others to believe in second chances. She met former students who volunteered their time, some of whom shared how her lessons had impacted their lives. Each reunion was filled with tears and gratitude. Barron, too, felt a shift within himself. His days were no longer filled with shallow meetings and self-serving goals. He dedicated his resources and time to uplifting others, finding purpose in each success story the Phoenix Project helped create. One evening, as they sat together reviewing plans for a new shelter, Mrs. Hadley turned to Barron with a soft smile. "You've changed," she said simply. Barron looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "You changed me," he replied. "You reminded me that true wealth isn't measured in what we keep, but in what we give." Years later, the Phoenix Project had grown into a national initiative with Mrs. Hadley's face and story at the forefront. Documentaries were made, articles written, and awards given. But through it all, she remained humble, always returning to the classrooms and shelters that had become her sanctuary. For Barron, the journey transformed not only his life, but the lives of countless others. Standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their latest center, he reflected on how one moment of compassion had sparked a movement. It was a testament to the idea that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to ignite hope. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps spread hope to those who need it most. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Together, we can make a difference, one act of kindness at a time.